Hi, boys and girls. This is Mr. Yates with guest reader Ms. Garcia. We're going to both be reading Chapter 16, The Other Constitution, from Book 4 of our history. I'll start off with the first page, and then Ms. Garcia will continue on with the second. We're going to switch off between the two. Chapter 16, The Other Constitution. Sailing ships use wind for power. No wind, no power. Picture a fleet of full-rigged British naval vessels with no breeze in the air. This is a full-rigged naval vessel right here, boys and girls. See how the sails are all opened up? Well, they're stuck. Becalmed is the nautical word for it. And that was the situation at the mouth of the New York Harbor on July 17, 1812. The USS Constitution was surrounded by a British fleet. That handsome American ship, one of 6 frigates ordered when George Washington was president, was a sitting duck. As soon as the air stirred, it looks as if she would be blown from the water. What would you do? The Americans kedged. Kedged? What's the word that? Hopefully she'll explain that. Let's see. That means that they put a light anchor from the ship into a rowboat, rowed ahead, and then dropped that anchor called a kedge. Sailors on board the Constitution then pulled on the rope until they reached the anchor. Then they kedged again, and again, and again. After 3 exhausting days, they covered a distance, so when a breeze finally came, they were able to escape their enemy. That was just one of the exploits that made the Constitution special. A month later, in that same War of 1812, the Constitution took on British frigate HMS Garcia, and in a famous battle, destroyed her. Cannonballs from the Garcia kept bouncing off the sides of the Constitution. Huzzah! Her sides are made of iron, shouted a sailor who was there. And so after that, she was often called Old Ironsides. Let me go ahead and move over to the next page. All right. And there we go, Ms. Garcia.
All right. The ship was actually made of wood with thin copper sheathing to keep ships' worms away. But it was no accident that she withstood cannon fire. She was a symbol of the best American craftsmanship. She'd been built at Edmund Hart's shipyard in Boston. Each of her sister ships, the Chesapeake, Congress, Constellation, President, and United States, was built at a different American shipyard from Norfolk, Virginia, to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. They all followed the exact specifications of a Philadelphia man, Joshua Humphrey, who had designed the bigger-than-usual frigates. Okay. The Constitution's hull was 25 inches thick, with live oak at its center. Live oak, which grows in coastal areas of the South, like where I live in Virginia, is said to be the toughest wood in the world. Humphrey had ordered the best white oak for the keel, the ship's backbone, and the best Carolina pitch pine for the decks. Her giant masts, from which the sails hung, were made from towering New Hampshire pines. The 36 sails were sewn from canvas woven in Rhode Island. Boston's Paul Revere bid to supply the copper bolts that held the ship together. He said he could do it as cheap as anyone and as well. He was right. He got paid $3,820.33 for 15 tons of copper fittings and a ship's bell.
All right, we'll move on to the next page. A few months after the encounter with the Garcia, the Constitution whipped HMS Java, even though the Constitution had lost its steering wheel and was hardly able to maneuver. The British Admiralty, which is the head naval office, issued an order to British ships. They were not to get involved with the Americans one-to-one. They had to outnumber them in order to engage them in battle. The U.S. Constitution was famous even before the War of 1812. She was part of the official birth of the U.S. Navy. That was in 1794, when President Washington ordered those 6 cannon-toting frigates. At that time, the new nation had no navy. The colonies had put one together during the War of Independence. It was made up of merchant ships and fishing schooners, some 2,000 privateers. And I think I mentioned before, privateers is kind of a fancy word for saying pirate. Along with a few warships and a small fleet that Ben Franklin fought in France. Read about John Paul Jones for more about the American Revolutionary War Navy. Great Britain was the world's big naval giant, but America's scrappy and surprising sailors had played a decisive role in that fight for freedom. After the war, the Navy was abandoned. When Americans went to sea, and lots did, it was to trade. Our merchant ships were soon plying, that means sailing around the Mediterranean. For centuries, the North African states had demanded bribe money from anyone who wanted to sail that sea, then called the Barbary States. They are today's Libya, Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco. Barbary pirates, called corsairs, made things unpleasant for anyone who wouldn't pay up. Go ahead and move over here to the next page. Okay, Ms. Garcia.
Alrighty. So, in 1787, the U.S. government signed a treaty with Morocco agreeing to regular bribe payments. For a while, American ships were left alone. There it is. But in 1793, 8 American ships were seized. By February 1794, 126 Americans were being held as slaves in the city of Algiers. Algiers?
You got it, Algiers.
Okay, that's such a weird, I've never heard of it. Okay. More were captured. Something had to be done. Americans now wanted a navy. That was when President Washington authorized those 6 frigates. In addition, 5 other warships were built privately and sold to the government. Some smaller vessels were bought and converted, and privateers were made fit to fight. In the meantime, Algiers was demanding protection money, and there didn't seem to be much choice except to comply. In 1796, the president paid a peace ransom of almost $1 million. The U.S. sailors were released, and for a while, American ships sailed freely. By the time Jefferson became president, the United States had paid the Barbary States almost $2 million. Still, the Bey, or ruler, of Tripoli is a city in Libya. Tripoli? Yeah. I don't know. Didn't think he'd gotten his fair share. So, in 1801, he declared war on the United States. It was a war, I can't pronounce words today, that plodded along until 1804, when a task force with, hurrah, the USS Constitution as a flagship began pounding Tripoli with cannonballs. But an American ship, the Philadelphia, ran.
It ran aground and got stuck on unmarked reefs. The Barbary corsairs captured its crew of more than 300 sailors. They intended to float the ship and use it in the fight against the American fleet. That's when Lieutenant Stephen Decatur, in a small captured schooner named Intrepid, sailed into the harbor at night, climbed aboard the Philadelphia, set it afire, and got away. Read a biography of Decatur if you like to read about heroics. Meanwhile, the American consul, that's an ambassador, in Tunis, William Eaton, was getting ready for his own heroic actions. Eaton's story is complicated. You might want to read more about it on your own. He hated the pirate princes, and he didn't think the American bombardment would have lasting results. So he put together a motley, that means kind of a force of Americans, Greeks, and Arabs on a fleet of camels and marched 500 miles from Alexandria in Egypt across the Libyan desert to Darna. He attacked that town, it's in eastern Libya, and with the help of the American warships, captured it. All that led to a new treaty with Tripoli, signed on board the Constitution, and the release of the captive sailors after a ransom payment. Pirates, they're just thieves on water, complicate the world. But they did help provide us with a navy, and they helped make the Constitution famous. Her exploits in the War of 1812 added to her fame, and so did the story about her told of her first voyage, when the captain of a British frigate taunted those on the Constitution betting a cask of fine Madeira wine that he could beat them in a race. He handed over the wine. That means that they lost. All right, Ms. Garcia.
So, in 1830, when a story in the Boston Advertiser said that the USS Constitution was to be scrapped, lots of the people were upset. The story was wrong. The Navy was actually planning to overhaul the ship, but a young medical student, Oliver Wendell Holmes, didn't know that. He sat down and wrote a poem called Old Ironsides. It captured the public's imagination and was soon reprinted all over the nation. The Constitution had been famous before, but that poem made it even more so. Children in school were soon memorizing it. In 1844, the ship embarked on a round-the-world voyage that included visits to 25 foreign ports for diplomatic, scientific, and business affairs. She was seen as a symbol to the United States, her name added to that image. In the 1850s, Old Ironsides became a flagship of the American squadron. That squadron was organized to patrol the west coast of Africa and keep slave ships from sailing illegally for the United States. The Constitution captured one of those slavers. After that, she was mostly used as a training ship. By the end of the Civil War, all 5 of her sister ships had been turned into scrap. In 1897, Massachusetts Congressman John Fitzgerald, President John Fitzgerald, Congressman John Fitzgerald, oh wait, I started that line again, sorry guys. President, you're good. President John Fitzgerald Kennedy's grandfather had her move to Boston for her 100th birthday. But the old ship was beginning to wear out and someone suggested she be used for target practice. That enraged some Americans, including a group of school children who helped raise more than $600,000 to restore the ship. In 1947, another anniversary, the U.S. Post Office issued a commemorative stamp with a picture of the 3-masted frigate. It then cost 3 cents to mail a first-class letter. In 1997, she celebrated her 200th birthday by sailing under her own power into Boston Harbor. Today, the Constitution is still a commissioned warship and the world's oldest still afloat. She is docked in Boston and visited by nearly 1 million people a year. Now, back to land in the 19th century, it's 1817 and a new president is taking office.
All right. Thanks, boys. Thank you, Ms. Garcia, for reading along with me today. And boys and girls, if there's any passages or any parts that you're confused on as you go over this and working on your summaries, just please email me or Ms. Garcia and we can help you out with it. And thanks for taking the time to learn more about the USS Constitution. Bye-bye.